Folks, I thought long and hard about what I wanted to share this morning. On Yom Kippur, I'll be reflecting a bit about some of the challenges facing us as a people. I will reflect a bit on Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, whom we love, the land and the people of Israel. But this morning, on the first day of the new year, I wanted to reflect on something which I believe is personal, but also, I believe, universal. And since Rosh Hashanah is a day of memory, I want to share a memory that I have of when I was a teenager. I was in high school. I was sitting in biology class, and we were having a test. Now, to prepare for this test, as for other tests, I studied the best that I could. I had a study group, so I sometimes would study with friends and we tried to help each other. I was not a perfect biology student, but I tried, and I was honest about my work, and I was proud of what I accomplished. So I remember that I was sitting taking this test, and I also had allergies as a kid, so I always needed tissues, and I didn't bring any with me. And so I got up in the middle of the test and I walked towards the front of the room where the teacher was sitting. She was a good teacher, a very strict teacher. And I took a tissue and I was walking back to my seat. And she said to me in front of the entire class, "Are your eyes wandering, Mr. Stecker?" Implying that I was cheating off of somebody else's test. And in that moment, two thoughts crystallized. The first was not so nice. It was something like, if I were going to cheat off of anybody, it wouldn't be that guy. And the second thought that I had, which definitely took time to fully take shape, was, this just isn't fair. I'm basically a good person. I tried to help other people prepare for their test as they helped me. I just don't deserve to be accused of something that isn't true. Now, I imagine that all of us have situations, some of them might be individual, some of them might be long-standing, where we look at our lives and we say, it's just not fair. I'm basically a good person, and what is happening to me, what is happening to loved ones, just isn't fair. I could give you other examples from my life, and I suspect that you can think of examples from your own life. You're a good person, and you're struggling to find a job. You're a good person, and people you love have terrible things happen to them. You're a good person and you're trying to find the right life partner to share your life with, and so far you haven't been successful. You're a good person and you try to help other people, and when you try to help other people, sometimes you take garbage for it, sometimes even from the people that you are trying to help. You're a good person and you watch your friends achieve certain milestones that you have not achieved. And as much as you say to them, I am happy for you, and you are happy for them, there's a piece of you that resents that you haven't achieved what the people around you have achieved. I believe that on some level, we all imagine that if we are behaving decently, if we are basically good people, then we have a certain deserving of living lives that are basically good, or at least lives where the good outweighs the bad. I'm not going to shock you if I say, spoiler alert, that I'm going to suggest that we need to find the strength to be good anyway. That we need to find the strength to be good even when we don't feel rewarded, even when we believe that our lives are deeply unfair. Now, Rachel and I did not actually share our thoughts with each other before we offered them to the congregation, but I'm going to take us on a journey that has 3 steps to it. All right, I guess Rabbi Eckstein has impacted all of us. And each step of the journey starts with the letter C. Complain, consider, and commit. The first part of the journey is to complain. Now, my goodness, who would imagine that on the first day of the new year, the rabbi would give you permission to complain? My mother, may she rest in peace, had a wonderful sense of humor. One year, as we were getting ready for Rosh Hashanah, we were all gathered upstairs and we were kind of hanging out together. And she said, because at the time, I think my sister and I might have been in therapy. So she said, I want to officially ask for forgiveness from your therapists, which I thought showed a certain amount of self-awareness and humor. But she also, though she certainly faced life with courage, would occasionally complain. And once she had a number of things that she was complaining about, which had to do with certain aspects of her life, including us. And when she was finished, I said, oh my God, Mom, I feel terrible. And she said, I'm so sorry about that, sweetheart, but guess what? I feel much better now. Now, people think that the gold standard is to just be able to accept your difficulties with a stiff upper lip and not to complain at all. And in fact, the biblical character of Job was known for suffering silently. But the truth is, that's just the first two chapters and the last chapter. In the middle, which some people attribute to different origins, there is very complicated poetry. And one of the first things he says is Yovad Yom Ivaled Bo, which basically means I wish the day that I was born never existed, or I wish I had never been born. And the Psalms, which are attributed to King David, contain numerous existential cries. Eli, lama azavtani, God, why have you abandoned me? I think that if we don't let ourselves complain, if we don't allow ourselves to cry out, we are pretending that maybe our suffering is our fault and maybe it's not so bad. And our tradition says, yell and cry and do whatever it is you need to do. Even if you are angry at our Creator, let it out. However, doing so can only get us so far. Not everybody wants to keep listening to us as we complain. And so we come to the second part of our journey, which is to commit. Forgive me. It's to consider. Thank you, you were listening. We're going to get to commitment in a moment. Second part is to consider, and it's to consider the real value of our goodness. So sometimes we imagine that our goodness is going to create a kind of protective force field around us, and it's going to shield us and our loved ones from harm. And actually, there is an ancient tradition that comes from the Proverbs, Tzedakah tatzil mimavet, which means that righteousness, tzedakah, saves people from death. What's interesting, though, is that the object of that sentence is actually ambiguous. So who does it save? So there's a story about a woman who was extremely righteous, and she would give tzedakah, and specifically she would give people food on Friday so that they would have what to eat for Shabbat. And people would line up and they would come to her house and she would give them food and her children would help. And when they asked her, Mom, why are we giving food to people we don't know? She would say, Tzedakah tatzil mimavet. Tzedakah saves people from death. So sadly, she became ill and she did not recover. And ultimately she passed away. And the family was devastated. And they sat Shiva for her. And when they got up from Shiva, a few hours later, somebody knocked on the door who hadn't heard what happened. And he was hoping that she would provide him with food for Shabbat. And her husband said to this person, wait here in the living room, went to the kitchen, started to gather the food. And one of his children came up to him and said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm getting food ready for somebody who's waiting in our living room. And the child said, but all those years, Mom said, tzedakah tatzil mimavet. Tzedakah, righteous, good behavior, saves people from death. Well, it didn't save Mom. And his father looked at him, teary-eyed, and pointed to the person waiting in the living room and said, maybe it will save him. We need to think of our goodness not as a protective shield, because life is complicated and all sorts of things happen to all sorts of people. We need to understand that when we act with goodness, we can make changes in other people's lives. I have seen people in this congregation care for loved ones, and the loved ones don't recover. Does that mean their goodness was a waste? Not at all. Their goodness helped this person to achieve moments of healing, moments of grace. I have seen people in our congregation who give of their time and their souls to this community, and bad things have happened to them and to their families, and they continue to give because they understand the impact of their goodness. I have seen people who take great risks to defend others, to advocate for others, and they are not always met with support. Sometimes they are actually met with criticism and scorn, and they continue to be good to these people because they understand that their goodness matters. It might move the needle on certain issues. Maimonides said roughly 1,000 years ago, we have to see that the world is hanging in the balance, and every good deed that we do can move the needle to goodness for individuals, for communities, and also for the entire world. There is a wonderful movie that came out in 2009. It is a very, very Jewish movie, maybe the most Jewish movie recently made. It's called A Serious Man, and it was made by the Coen brothers. And basically it is a modern midrash on Job, somebody to whom all sorts of bad things happen, even though he is a good guy. And he looks for insight to try to make sense of his life. And he asks one rabbi and he gets an answer that doesn't help. And he asks another rabbi and he gets an answer that doesn't help. And then he tries to make an appointment with the senior rabbi of the congregation. And ultimately he can't get an appointment. That's not such an uplifting part of the movie. But then his son is preparing for his bar mitzvah, and his son goes to see this rabbi. And the rabbi looks at this bar mitzvah, and he looks him in the eye, and he says, be a good boy. No explanation, just be a good boy. I've been a rabbi now for roughly 30 years. This to me encapsulates it. We need to be good people, or as I saw this wonderful sign, when Deanna and I were in Tel Aviv recently, Tihiyu Tovim, in the plural, be good, not because we can be sure that it will create a protective force field, not because we are going to be held up on people's shoulders and given a Nobel Prize. Neither of those things may happen. We should be good because we understand that our goodness can tip the balance. The rabbi said, mitzvah goreret mitzvah. One mitzvah can bring another along. We can be good and should be good because we start to see that our goodness makes a difference. So we have arrived at the final part of our journey, which is to commit. And I want to ask us to commit to continuing to be good, not because we know that we'll be shielded from life's inevitable sadness and difficulties, not because we expect that we are going to be heralded because of our goodness. We should be good because we know that our goodness matters. As Rabbi Eckstein mentioned a few years ago, we don't say to each other, have a happy new year in Jewish tradition. We say Shana Tova, have a good year. And we are not passive observers of the upcoming year. We can help to make this a good year by continuing to commit to bringing goodness in the world. So if our eyes do wander, let them wander towards others who are bringing goodness in the world so that we can be inspired by them. Let our goodness help to make this year, Shana Tova, a good year for everyone. Amen.